back to Andersen Acres. We're here in the kitchen again, and tonight we're going to be making a Caramel Crunch Bagel. These are sweet and delicious and really actually easy to make. So in order to have a caramel flavored bagel, we need to make a caramel syrup to put in our bagel dough. So what we need to do is make that syrup. You can buy caramel syrups, but making it is so easy, and I'm sure you have the ingredients in your cupboard, and it only takes a few minutes. So the first thing you're going to need is a 1/4 cup of butter. Okay, it does need to be butter. Margarine will not work for this step. All right, it must be butter. So 1/4 cup of butter. Get that heating over medium-high heat. Don't go all the way to high heat or you're going to end up burning your butter. So medium-high heat. Kind of get your whisk out, and as soon as that is partially melted, we're going to add our other ingredients. Okay? So it's partially melted now. So we're going to add about 3 tablespoons of a darker corn syrup. So not a lily white or anything like that. You're going to use a standard dark corn syrup, and you're going to go about 3 tablespoons. Okay? This takes a minute because I'm running low on syrup. There we go. That's about 3 tablespoons. It doesn't have to be exact. 3 tablespoons-ish. Okay, kind of mix that together. Then you're going to add 1/2 cup of powdered sugar. Might be called icing sugar where you are. So you're going to mix this together. Okay, so it kind of looks a little bit lumpy at first. What you need to do is whisk that together, and now you're going to keep heating it. What you want is for this mixture to boil. So use your whisk to really scrape the sides so you don't have any sugar riding up, because you need that sugar to totally dissolve and for that to come to a boil. So you're just going to leave it and kind of move it around a little bit so it doesn't burn, but you're not going to move it too much, just enough to keep it from burning. Okay? What we need to do is turn this into like a caramelly type syrup. So we need to bring it to a boil. We need to boil it for 1 minute once it hits that boiling point. Just keep moving it on occasion. It's almost boiling. It's boiling when it's bubbling a lot. So you can see, I can already see a bunch of bubbles starting to rise to the surface. When those really start to pop, then it's boiling. Then we're going to set a 1-minute timer. Because what we want is 1 minute of boiling. And we're almost there. And when that happens, I don't know if you can see it very well on camera, but when you have bubbles starting to break the surface, that's when you set your 1-minute timer. And you literally set a timer. Because if you go too far, now we're going to really keep it moving. Once it starts to boil, you need to keep it moving. In fact, you can turn the heat on your element off at that point, because the element will stay hot, unless you have a convection stove. If you have one of those where you need the magnetic pans, the word is escaping me at this second, that's fine. But if you have that, where you have one of the stoves where you need the special magnetic pans, then your heat goes off immediately. You'll have to leave your heat on. I don't have that kind of stove. I can turn my heat off. Okay, and what you're waiting for is exactly a minute once it's boiling. So this is actually caramelly now. So after a minute, you'll actually smell it turn to caramel. You can let it go an extra 30 seconds if you want a darker, there it is, that's my minute. If you want it a darker caramel, you can let it go an extra 30 seconds. But you'll actually be able to smell it. So now I'm taking it off the heat. Keep going, keep mixing it, because the bottom of your pan will be hot, and what you don't want is your syrup burning. So the bottom of your pan is still hot, so take it off the heat. And you'll notice the bubbling has slowed. You just want to make sure it's not going to burn on the bottom, because the bottom of your pan is still quite warm. Okay, so now that we have that where it is, just sitting there doing its thing, you want to let that sit for 5 minutes. Okay, I don't need that anymore, so that's why I tossed it in the sink. So 5 minutes, let it sit. It's got to cool. We can't put it in our bread maker or in our bread mixer or anything like that until it's cooled for 5 minutes. So in 5 minutes, we'll come back and keep going. All right, so now we have our syrup, which actually ends up solidifying a little bit. So it ends up being kind of like this. So it's really like caramel. Okay, it really is caramel. So what you're going to want to do is take that, and I'm using my bread maker. You obviously don't have to use a bread maker. You could do this by hand, or you could mix it in a mixer. It doesn't really matter. I'm using my bread maker to mix, knead, and do the first rise. So you can do that as well, or you can do it any other way that gets you to where you need to be. So as long as you end up with your dough having completed its first rise, it literally does not matter. Okay? So you just want to take all of that syrup, all of that caramel, put it in there. You need it. Okay? To that, we're going to add 1 cup of water, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. Yes, these are sweet, sweet bagel. I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of salt. That's just plain old table salt, but you can use a kosher or a Himalayan sea salt, doesn't matter. You're fine either way. This is 1/2 cup of granola. This is what gives it the crunch. Now at this point, if you wanted to, you could cut up about 1/2 cup of chopped walnuts. So you could put some walnut or some pecan in here. I'm not, because my niece, who is allergic to walnuts and pecans, is coming over. So I'm skipping the walnut, but if you wanted to put walnut in, this would be the time. After you've added your walnut, you want 3 cups of just your regular bread flour or your all-purpose flour, whatever you normally use to make bread. And then we're going to add 1 heaping teaspoon of yeast. I'm, of course, using bread machine yeast because I'm using the bread maker, but you can use a quick rise or a traditional yeast, whatever you want. So I'm going to pop this in the bread maker, and we will come back in about 1.5 hours when I have a workable dough that has completed its first rise. All right, so our dough has risen at least its first rise. So it rises for about 1 hour, and it should kind of feel like a marshmallow. Now you might have here and there a little bit of the syrup that might not have fully worked itself in. So after its first rise, you just kind of take the time to kind of smush it, and it also helps get those air bubbles out. Don't want air bubbles. So just make sure everything is thoroughly mixed, including that granola. Make sure it's not clumped up anywhere. Sometimes during the rise, granola can almost migrate through your dough, and it's annoying. So make sure it's all evenly distributed. Then you're going to want to roll it out so that you can cut it. Now I'm using this adjustable rolling pin, and what you do is you take off the individual rings here, and it allows you to control the depth of your dough. So I'm doing about 3/8 of an inch. You know, it's a good height for bagels. And I like being able to keep it nice and consistent. So I'll put a link to this rolling pin in the description because it's a really good rolling pin. But you can roll it out without a adjustable rolling pin if you want. Remember, when you're rolling, if you get an air bubble, pop it. I don't like air bubbles. Air bubbles are bad. So kind of pop those air bubbles and then go back to rolling. Okay, so anytime you see an air bubble, give it a pop. So what we're going to do is we're going to roll this out and cut our bagels. Okay? Air bubble, don't like that. So kind of also give it a good pat. Roll it again. Just keep doing that. There we go. That's about good. So now I'm going to use this bagel cutter. This is a standard size bagel, so like 3.5 inches across. I do recommend using a bagel cutter because it's just so much easier. So I've heard from a few commenters saying they've had trouble finding bagel cutters locally. That's why I linked to one in the description, because I actually did too. None of my shops here had a bagel cutter, so I actually ordered one online. So I linked to the same one I ordered online in the video description. because yes, sometimes they're not easy to find. They're kind of a specialty item. So unless a lot of people do a lot of baking and they do a lot of specialty baking where you are, you may have some difficulty finding a bagel cutter. So yeah, I linked to one in the video description for that reason. Ugh, get off of there. So you just keep cutting your bagels, re-roll the excess, and place your bagels on a cooking sheet. So I'm not going to make you watch all of these. So I have to re-roll this because now I'm out of space. So I'm not going to make you watch all of that. But when you are done re-rolling your bagels and cutting them out with your bagel cutter, what you want to do is put them on a cookie sheet, set them aside on a cookie sheet, and let them relax. While they're relaxing, get a pot of water and put it on your stove and set it to boiling. By the time it's done boiling, your bagels will have relaxed sufficiently. They don't need to sit and rise because they're going to go in boiling water, but they do have to just kind of relax a little so they don't go bonkers in the water. Okay, so roll out your dough, keep rolling until you don't have any more dough, and make sure you pinch out those air bubbles. Don't want those air bubbles. All right, so I'm not going to make you watch me roll the rest of this dough because that's really annoying. But get yourself a pot of water, set it to boiling, and let your bagels relax for the few minutes it'll take for your water to come to a boil. We'll be right back and I'll show you what to do next. All right, so our water is now boiling. We need to add about 2 tablespoons of honey into it. So 1, 2. So about 2 tablespoons of honey. We do need to boil our bagels, and boiling them in honey gives them just a little bit of extra sweetness, even though these are pretty sweet bagels anyway. So once you put the honey in, give it a mix. You're going to need some kind of slotted spoon to remove your bagels, and just let it return to a boil. That only takes a minute because the honey doesn't really slow down your boiling. And once it's returned to a boil, pop in a bagel. So you're going to want to boil your bagels for 30 seconds to a minute per side. All right, and be aware that because we have chunks of granola in our dough, we might have some granola come out of the dough and end up floating in the water. No big deal. Just ignore it. You don't even need to fish it out. Just pour it down the drain later. It's not a big deal. Just ignore any bits of escaped granola. They won't matter that much. So 30 seconds to a minute per side. Boiling them a little bit longer gives you a slightly chewier texture. But if you don't want them that chewy, stick to 30 seconds. So remember to boil both sides and then put them back on your rack, on your cookie sheet. So when you're done boiling your bagels, what you're going to want to do is preheat your oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. And you're going to want to bake these for 20 to 25 minutes, depending on how dark you want your bagels. Now, I bake mine for 22 to 23 minutes based on my oven. And let's just fish that out of there. Do the next one. So you're not going to watch me boil all dozen of these because there's no point. But basically, this is what you do. You just boil each bagel about a minute per side, 30 seconds to a minute per side. Then you're going to bake them for 20 to 25 minutes at 375 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not going to make you watch me boil all these because it's pretty boring. So we will come back once they're baked so you can see what the finished product looks like. And there we go, Caramel Crunch Bagels that are sweet and delicious. They're also easy to make. They make a great breakfast because of the granola in them, and they're really fast to eat. You can just grab and go. My favorite way to eat them is straight out of the oven, break them open, a little bit of butter, and they are fantastic. You can also sprinkle a little bit of powdered sugar on them if you would like to sweeten them up a little bit, even though they're plenty sweet as is. So I hope you've enjoyed making Caramel Crunch Bagels with us here today at Andersen Acres. Make these for your friends and family. Everyone is sure to be impressed. We'll see you tomorrow.